who's going to talk is a person who's going to tell us a little bit about the history of messaging. He is Amit Shafrir. He's formerly president of AOL. He was the general manager of ICQ, and basically one of the biggest names in the messaging space. I'm personally very interested to hear what he has to say, and I'm sure you are too, so please welcome Amit Shafrir.
So I think I'm burdened to give you a little history lesson. See the board faces making their. Okay, I'll try to keep the history part short, and then maybe open up the Q&A. Maybe focus more on the lessons and impacts on today's world from past experiences. So, does anyone know what is considered the first instant messaging software?
Yelling.
No, it's not ICQ.
Computer.
Not chat. Messaging.
SMS.
SMS. Non-SMS. So just so people know, just in terms of definition, messaging is, or instant messaging is the combination of ability to send a message and presence. Okay, and, people don't know what presence means. Where am I? Am I online? Am I offline? Am I away from my computer? So that's the original SMS. Which started very early, 1985, I think, the first SMS. Was just the ability to send messages without knowing whether the person is actually online, whether they receive it or anything like that. So there was a small Israeli company called Ubeek. Anyone heard of Ubeek? That's, some people get the glory and some people just do the work. So a small Israeli company called Ubeek was acquired by AOL in 1996. Amongst 30 other companies that AOL has acquired at the time, the vast majority of which disappeared forever. Ubeek basically invented this concept of presence and knowing whether you're online. AOL bought them. After a year, they figured out they didn't know what to do with them, and they let them go, and then IBM bought them, and they were integrated into Lotus Notes. So that's kind of the first really instant messaging software company that no one today knows of. Then, the one that became more known, definitely in the US, was the AOL Buddy List. Anyone here old enough to have used that? All right. So the AOL Buddy List was the first walled garden, so a closed environment messaging system for consumers. There were other systems that I'm not talking about in the site before. And then, as history goes, AOL acquired ICQ. ICQ is considered the first open internet messaging system, meaning it wasn't a walled garden, it was someone that anyone on the web could message anyone on the web. That's kind of ICQ's Hall of Fame. And then the biggest, mightiest instant messaging platform of the 90s and the beginning of the 2000s was AIM. AOL is the offshoot of AOL, which was open to anyone. If you're old enough to have been around, AIM was it. Definitely in the US, that was as big as it got, even though the numbers were nothing as close to the numbers today that you see Facebook and other systems. But in terms of penetration in the US online population, almost everyone was on AIM. That's how you message. And then it evolved. There was MSN Messenger, Microsoft, right? And Yahoo Messenger, right? Everybody was about messaging. It was a major thing and a kind of an anchor to all the time portals, which were the big businesses. You had to have two things. You had to have email and you had to have messaging. So everybody had it. And I was kind of lucky enough to be around, or old enough to have been around, when a lot of things got invented. The things that we take for granted today. Things like presence, knowing that the other side is online, that the other side has received the message or has viewed it, and they're not responding to me, so they're ignoring me. So all these kind of things, they didn't exist. Someone sat around and invented what is important to someone. It's important for someone to say whether they're online. And then the very next thing is it's important to someone to cheat. For them to be online, but for no one to know that they're online, to be in invisible mode. That's an invention, I remember, I think it was hatched. And then the ability to say, well, I'm away from my computer. All these things are kind of subtle messages to the other side, meaning if you don't get a message back from you immediately, it's because I'm away from my computer. And then the invention of, well, how about the computer will figure out automatically that you're away from the computer by the fact that there's no movement and will set you as awake. All these things kind of evolved in the late 90s, early 2000s. And one of the biggest inventions that I can recall, which I thought was pretty cool, which they would take for granted, was the ability to send a message from your desktop to your mobile phone. And again, you have to have been around that time and to understand how big of a deal that was. Where someone could sit at their computer and send a message and someone would get that on their mobile phone. That was really huge. That invention happened in October of 2000. I remember, the reason I remember that date, it was done by ICQ, and ICQ called that version ICQ 2000B, very famous version for ICQ, those who know, and that the ability to send from the desktop to your mobile phone. I'd like to talk about kind of the three main things that are important for anyone who's dealt with messaging in the past and today. And it's very simple. One is growth. You started something, how do you become big? Then how do you create a business out of that? And then how do you not die? How do you not go to the big graveyard of messaging services that are out there? Which the vast majority, small or big services, end up. Small from services you've never heard of, too big. Who here uses MSN Messenger today? Yahoo Messenger? All right. So these are the three big things. So when you talk about, the first thing is growth. Messaging is one of those great products that if you're in, they have the ability to be naturally viral. Everybody's looking for virality. Everybody's looking for organic growth. Messaging is a communication device or system. Its value is only if there are more people on it. So naturally, if I am on some new messaging system, the thing that I want to do is I want to get my friends on it. I think this is really cool. I'm going to evangelize. I'm going to tell everybody around me, this is cool. Try it out. I'm going to try hard. As opposed to any other app or service, I won't do that. And I will do it naturally. It's not going to be one of the things where the service is asking me, could you tell your friends? And I say, oh, okay, I have to, or they're going to force me all these things. No, I want to do this. So natural viral growth is the ability that is built into any communication service, including messaging. One of the biggest inventions at the time, which today is hated by most of us, was, we called it the email sucker. So what it was at the time, late 90s, everybody was on Outlook. Anyone here still uses Outlook? There are a few, okay. Everybody was on Outlook. All your contacts and emails were in Outlook. So what we came up with, and I say we, I had really very little to do with it, I'm just around. Smart people in the product came up with, how about we allow the user, instead of inviting their friends one by one, to suck their contacts from Outlook and then send email invitations to all of them. How cool would that be? And guess what, at that time, that was a really cool invention, and people loved it. Say, yeah, thank you for providing that so that I know I don't have to do it one by one. And of course, now every system out there, if it's Facebook, if it's LinkedIn, if it's anything that you have, will immediately ask you, can I access your contacts? Okay? And can I send invitations? And please allow me to do that. And most people say, no, I don't want to spam. Word doesn't exist so much. No, spam, fine. But that functionality that allowed this kind of growth was built in. In today's world, you have to figure out how to get wild growth if you want to have a successful messaging system. And it's either by creating a product that is so cool that people want to talk about it constantly and send an easy way to get it to grow, or by other means that have not been invented. For example, on mobile, doing this, let's call it pseudo-spamming mechanism, is much harder. You need a lot more permissions. You need a lot more approvals or notifications, things of that nature. But those who have cracked it are the ones who have shown initial growth. So let's say you've now found initial growth and you're growing and your life is good. Right? The next phase in your life is figure out a business plan, which is tough. So if you are as big and mighty as some, as Facebook said, or you may have a solution, or you may push that out for a while. But if you're small, then at some point you're going to look for that business opportunity within that. And one of the things that I've seen in the past is that usually things that have worked were kind of new, meaning not yet another solution that someone else has done. And I'll give you an example. An example I like of this kind of mob-like mentality. When ICQ invented that desktop to mobile messaging solution, it did it by kind of, quote-unquote, I don't want to say hacking because it was legitimately done with a partner, but kind of getting into the mobile messaging system in a certain way, where people would start getting these messages on their phone. And at that time, most, outside the US, I think mostly the business model for SMS, I'm not sure if you're familiar with, was that you got your incoming messages for free, and when you send a message, you were charged 10 cents. That's kind of the general business that way it works. So getting messages was free, sending messages cost money. And what's usually the first thing that someone does when they get a message? They respond, right? And that's how mobile operators make money. So ICQ put the system in, and quietly, unbeknownst to the various operators around the world, their customers started getting these messages. And they started responding, thus generating revenue for the mobile operators, all without the mobile operators actually knowing. And then when ICQ would come and say, the mobile operator, hey, Vodafone, you know, we really like to sign an agreement with you to formalize this. And if you don't, you know, it'd be a shame if this $1 million of revenue, which was a lot of money at the time, would just go away if you turn it off. You know, it'd be really a shame if something happened to that money. And guess what? These deals were then done, and etc. But that was kind of the new way of creating a business that wasn't done before. Obviously, once that was done, everybody understood the business there, and you couldn't replicate it by others, or you couldn't come up with something new in the same fashion. So I think you have to figure out your business ability. And you know, WhatsApp came up with their revenue model a while ago. It wasn't a business. Not sure how much you guys are familiar with WhatsApp, with a $1 for certain downloads on certain platform. It's far from a business. If you look at the latest financials that Facebook put out last week, I think this is not really anything that would be of significance for something that has 600 million users. So WhatsApp has solved their real business solution by getting themselves sold to Facebook, and over time, I'm pretty sure Facebook will figure out how to make that into a viable business. And then the last thing that I think is crucially important for any messaging system is how not to die, how not to become irrelevant, how not to disappear. I have a list somewhere of hundreds of messaging systems and solutions and apps and platforms that are gone. There are today probably between 100 and 200 messaging systems today that are alive, most of which will be gone. Okay? There are the big ones that I mentioned before that are gone. So what's the formula, right? How does one who has managed to grow, managed to build a business, how does one make sure they don't disappear? And the answer is really simple, if you know, just intuitively. It's you got to do two things. You got to continue to innovate, and you've got to see opportunities in the marketplace and not miss them. Right? Easier said than done. I'll give you an example. The Facebook WhatsApp acquisition, famous $19 billion company that was made. How many people here think that was a good deal for Facebook? Right? How many here think that spending $19 billion was too much money? All right. So I'll go back in history and give you a nice true story. I don't know that it's been ever told. I think in 2003, maybe, there was a small company in China. It was called OICQ. Anyone heard of it? Okay. OICQ was a clone of ICQ. Chinese were great cloners. Everything I did, they cloned. ICQ, they cloned. Went out every good product, they cloned many variations. And they had one called OICQ. And guess what? It was China, even though it was more than 10 years ago, it was growing. It was growing. And one day I get a deck in front of me that said that this little thing is for sale. For relatively not a lot of money. Not a lot of money. And I said, you know, well, they're cloning us, they're, you know, it's not fair, they're using our logo, all this stuff that could never be possible anywhere outside of China, but, you know, they'd be sued immediately. And I said, you know, let's buy them. Well, we did buy them. I wasn't able to convince the powers that be at AOL that this was a good deal. Well, this OICQ that continued growing became, later on, QQ, which became Tencent, which is a huge multi-billion-dollar company, much bigger than AOL, which now has its own new instant messaging system called WeChat, which has, I don't know, 3, maybe 400 million users on it, some big number. So that opportunity went away. So if AOL had acquired them, a couple things could have happened. AOL would have owned this great entity and value, or maybe it would have killed it off and disappeared. But that opportunity went away. From my perspective, the amount that Facebook paid for WhatsApp, I do it in a heartbeat. For 10% of Facebook value at the time, they got this huge growing entity which may or may not replace Facebook messaging abilities if and when it dies. Now, Facebook is also smart enough to try and innovate internally and launch Facebook Messenger and do all kinds of things on that front. So they're doing both things. They're innovating, coming up with new things, and doing the identification of opportunities in the marketplace, being very bold, very ballsy, and actually ensuring the future by doing these two things. Again, the graveyard is full of messaging platforms that did not do that. One of the things that I forgot to mention, and this is interesting that I saw in the news last night, is Skype. People know Skype, people on Zoom use Skype. Skype has been stagnant for a while. At some point it was the messaging platform mostly used for voice, people using that was the claim to fame, but they're a messaging platform. It was stagnant for a while. It wasn't innovative. Whether or not it has to do with the Microsoft acquisition is a different story, but that was the case. Last night I read that they're about to come up with this unbelievable science fiction-like innovation. That is, I'll be able to talk with someone Skype in English, and there'll be a real-time translation of what I'm saying into another language, and the other side will hear that. Now, that's an amazing innovation. Right? That's something that I would pay for if it worked. That I can get Skype out of the way where I was going away to the graveyard. Even though it's got, I don't know, 400 or 500 million users, it's got $1 billion revenue or something like that. It wasn't heading anywhere. When's the last time you saw someone going around saying, hey, you got to use Skype, this is a great thing, it's wonderful? It wasn't. This type of innovation, to get it back there. So I think, again, that's just the other part is innovation. The thing I wanted to mention is you have got to constantly be vigilant about these two things, innovating and identifying and executing on opportunities. And today, you know, there's this all these things that are happening with various, whether it's ephemeral, whether it's anonymous, it's all these things. Are they good? Are they bad? You know, they mentioned his opinions about that, similar opinion. But it doesn't matter. These are things that are fragmenting. Some of them will catch on, some of them will not. The thing to remember, though, with messaging, at least from my experience, is that more has usually been less. When you build a messaging platform, you started adding more and more functionality to it. oh, and it can do this, and it can do that, and it can do video, and it can... You had to do a lot of things at the time in the late 90s to compete, but people didn't care and people didn't use that. So when ICQ was usually considered the most complex in terms of the number of functions it had, the number one thing that people used, messaging. Instagram had a similar story I read from founders a couple of weeks ago, that they started out and had all kinds of functionality. And then they figured out, people are really only using this one thing called photos. How about we focus on that? And that's when they took off. I think this is a common thread that I see on various messaging platforms. They become too big, too complicated. That's another route towards that graveyard. So becoming focused on one good thing, doing it very well, probably a good key for any messaging system. And then the other thing that I don't know if anyone has a solution. When you become big, like Facebook, you are becoming the system that my mom is on. No offense to the moms, but I don't want to be in that system. Okay, so you become so big when everybody's on it, and some people want to no longer be on it. I don't have a recipe for how to solve that, right? That, I think, is one of the main reasons that a lot of things may disappear unless you create something else new that is different. All these new systems that are out there are appealing to different demographics. When they become the system for everyone, they start their demise. That's what history has shown. I think I'm going to stop here and open up for questions. Yes?
Jacob asked me a question. Back then, when you were in the moment, right, in terms of what you're saying now from hindsight, but back then when you were in the moment, AIM reaching 100% penetration at the time, or ICQ, was there a feeling that this was temporary?
No. Very good question. Very good question. The sense, the question was at the moment when everything was great, when AIM was, virtually 100% penetration of the online population, whether a sense or a feeling that this is temporary, that this may go away, and I would say, for most people at the time, that feeling wasn't there. I personally am born paranoid and believe that only paranoid will survive, etc. But for most people, this is not my saying. This is Andy, girl from Intel. Only the paranoid survive. Most people around us did not think that this could ever go away. We own it. Okay. I think, by the way, and I'm a big fan of Facebook. If you haven't noticed what I'm saying, I think at Facebook people are sitting down and saying, "Oh my God, this is all going to go away tomorrow. What are we going to do?" And I think that's the only reason that they're continuing to do well. But at the time, AOL owned it. That's why I think it ultimately did not fare so well. Yes?
Here.
What's your name?
Michael.
There's a,
My question is, when do you think that it's time to move on to something else? Because you mentioned that if you work on one thing, then you're guaranteed success. And Instagram only focuses on photos. When do you think it would be time to move on to video? Some video there.
Well, that's a good answer. A good question. The question was, when is it time to do a change? When is it time to move on? I think there's no real good answer to that. There's no recipe. If there was a recipe, then all companies would be successful because they would follow this recipe. Now it's time to do something else. It's up to the geniuses who are the people who run the product to feel, right? To feel, we've got to do some change. And those who feel right and do the right changes end up being successful. Those who feel less right and don't do it right at the right time, etc., are less successful. There is no recipe. The good, I equate today's product managers, people who build these products, to modern world geniuses. They just know, they just feel, and that's why they can't be replicated.
Okay, we're going to take one more question.
Yes, sir.
So I just want to say, actually, I think you're the person I need to thank, because I actually met my wife through the buddy list on AOL in 1997.
So it wasn't a question. One last question?
Sorry, you led by saying that one of the early innovations for ICQ was the desktop to mobile. Is there any reason why a company like WhatsApp wouldn't be doing that yet? It seems like, I know that emerging markets is really a focus, but why wouldn't they sort of do something that?
I can only speculate. I think WhatsApp has made it very clear that they're focusing on one thing only, and that's the mobile messaging. They don't care about desktop. Whether this is the right bet or not, time will tell. So far, it's paying off. They're doing well. They're growing. I did some work for a company a few years ago called Frame, and that was also had that concept of mobile only. And their number one complaint from users at the time was, well, why can't I communicate with someone on a desktop? And it may be an issue of timing. It may be that in the year 2013-14, being mobile only is absolutely fine. Because if you're on a desktop, you're old and irrelevant. I'm taking 16. Sorry. See, you have a desktop there. But it may be that it's fine. And it may be that 5 years ago, that wasn't the case. If you would not have a solution that supported the desktop as well, you couldn't survive. I think 600 million is the number I last heard for WhatsApp. 600 million users using this app, mobile only. They're doing something right.
I just, relevant to that, I think there are, we think in the United States, you know, we have desktop computers. I just got back from China, and it's the exception that somebody has a desktop computer. It's all mobile.
China.
And in fact, a lot of the sites that are being used on mobile are in fact blocked on desktop or through standard lines or through the cellular data network. You can get at them. So I think it's sort of a U.S.-centric that there's such a demand for desktop applications. You see a lot of explosive growth in places like China and India, where really
China, India, Latin America,
Yeah.
Africa is mobile only. I don't think
exactly. So that's, I think,
all the
driving a lot
emerging
of
markets
mobile.
doing well on mobile.
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Amit. Okay, next up, we have Mark Hall, who's Director of Products at LinkedIn. Hello, the CMO worked very hard to get Mark or somebody from LinkedIn because we feel that it's very relevant to the space here. So Mark, thank you very much for coming, and